ahead, Mr. Roach.
Thank you. The plaintiff should call Mickey Duniho.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Come on over here. See.
Please, let's go. You sat right next to the microphone. Nice to see you too.
How do you spell the last name?
Duniho.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Roach.
Thank you. Can you state your full name for the record, please?
Michael Allen Duniho.
And you go by Mickey?
I normally go by Mickey.
All right.
In fact, I'm Mickey in the Social Security database.
Mr. Duniho, can you briefly outline your work history for us and emphasize for us any special training you've gotten in terms of security issues and security systems issues?
Okay. I worked for the National Security Agency for 37 years. I started out as a linguist, moved into intelligence analysis, and then I got into computer programming, and then I got into cryptanalysis, and then went back to computer programming. In my cryptanalytic career, I used statistics to attack crypto systems, both mechanical and computerized systems. In my computer software career, I developed software for cryptanalysts, and I also participated in studying computer security, both how to defend against attacks and how to attack computers.
And when did you retire from the NSA?
I retired from NSA in 1997.
Are you a elector in Pima County?
I am.
Are you a plaintiff in this particular action?
I am.
Why was it that you believed that you wanted this action to go forward?
I guess I would say because I don't trust the county, but in general, we've seen a lot of statistical information, particularly lately, in the last couple of weeks, suggesting that the Republican Republican presidential primary might have been stolen. I have spent the last week, every spare moment, reviewing that statistical evidence, and it is somewhat persuasive. The problem with statistics is that statistics can suggest problems, anomalies, but statistics cannot answer the direct question of whether an election was or was not stolen. And I have been arguing for 6 years on the Election Integrity Commission that Pima County ought to be doing their early ballot hand count audit by precinct instead of by scanning batch. This is not a new issue with me. I have brought this issue up at every single meeting for the last 5 or 6 years that the commission has been in existence. And the county has steadfastly told me that the law did not require them to do it, and that it was too much trouble for them to do it, and therefore they weren't going to do it.
Let me back up for a second. You said you're on the commission, Pima County Elections Integrity Commission?
Yes.
And what is that commission? Like, how was it formed?
There was a lot of public concern after the RTA election and in 2006, and the county decided to hold some public hearings, I believe the winter of 2006 and 7, and a lot of people testified before these hearings about their concerns about election integrity. And I believe that it was in the spring of 2007 that Mr. Huckleberry, the county administrator, announced that they were going to create this county election integrity commission of citizens to advise the government on the subject of election integrity to try to improve the way Pima County processed elections.
Were you appointed, or did you just sign up on a sheet and therefore got on the commission? How'd that happen?
I was appointed by Ray Carroll to represent him on the commission.
And does the commission adhere with the various requirements, the open meetings laws that are required for government meetings to occur?
Yes, we are an official commission of the county government, and we adhere to open meetings laws.
Okay. Now, let me go back. You said that both professionally, you had a lot of experience with computer systems and both efforts to infiltrate and efforts to defend other people from infiltrating security or computer systems.
Yes.
And then after your retirement in 1997, as part of the Pima County Elections Integrity Commission or on your own, have you continued your study of security of computer systems?
In Pima County, I began my involvement with studying the computer security, I think, in about 2004. And I have studied the GEMS database management system that is used in Pima County for processing elections. GEMS is based on Microsoft Access. I have a copy of Access on my computer at home, and I have spent quite a lot of time analyzing the ability of someone to change an election database using Microsoft Access.
Have you become familiar with the methods that Pima County uses now to both physically to attempt to ensure that no one interferes with the outcome of the election, and electronically the methods that they use currently to make sure that elections are not tampered with?
Yes. Right. In 2006, I joined the Democratic Party's Election Integrity Committee, and I met with Brad Nelson and began pressuring him to improve the physical security of Pima County elections. The newspaper recently published a list of improvements, and virtually everything on that list was because we demanded it. It was not generally done because the county wanted to improve the way they were doing things. It was always a response to our concerns.
So you've got what you've asked for. Why are you still asking for stuff?
I have been asking for a hand count audit of early ballots for the last 6 years, and I have not been able to get the county to agree to do that.
Why that particular request?
Because the law that was passed in 2006 allowed the county, first of all, to count only 1% of the early ballots, and second of all, to count them by early ballot scan batches, which I consider to be a statistical waste of time. It doesn't tell you anything about fraud. There is no way for you to find fraud. When they select these batches for auditing, they print a summary report, a county-wide summary report before and after that batch is scanned. If the votes are being flipped inside the computer, the person doing the flipping can wait until after all of the audit batches have been scanned and then do the flipping in one fell swoop. I have found myself that I can go into the GEMS database and the votes are listed in columns, in sections of the database, in tables. I could go in there, find the column that has all of the votes for a particular race. I can take that column and create a new dummy column. I can move all of the votes for candidate A to this dummy column C. Then I move all the votes for candidate B from column B into A, and then move all of the votes from C back to B, and then throw away the column C, and I have just flipped all of the votes in that election from one candidate to another, and that takes me maybe 10 seconds.
Now, well, why wouldn't the batching and counting of the early ballots that's currently done, wouldn't it catch that kind of fraud?
Not unless you do a hand count audit by precinct. If you do a hand count audit by precinct and you have flipped all the votes in the election, then when you do the hand count audit by precinct, you're going to be counting actual ballots from an entire precinct, and you're going to be comparing them with the official report of the election. And the official report of the election includes the flipping. But the reports that were produced when you were doing the scanning does not include the flipping. So the flipping took place in time after those reports were printed. But the report that's important is the official report that is published after the election. That's the one that tells the world who won the election.
All right, let me back up and ask you to talk to us about the methods by which, if somebody wanted to influence the presidential race on down to one of the propositions in 2012's general election, I'd like to ask you some questions about how they could do it, given your knowledge of the security that's on the systems now. Can you answer some questions about that?
The county has made a lot of changes at our request in physical security. They have put split passwords on the central tabulator so that no one person could log into the tabulator by himself. They have taken away executive administrator privileges from the people who run the elections and given them to the IT department. They have put what they call tamper-evident seals on the case of the computer, so that the tamper-evident seal has to be taken off every morning before they start scanning and put back, and a new one put back on in the evening. And they keep records of all of this. All of these are things that we ask them to do, and they have done them.
With those things in place now.
But with those things in place, it is still possible for the software. The software is inside a black box.
What do you mean by black box?
The computer is a black box. We do not actually know what's going on inside the computer. Even if you had a copy of the source code for the application program, you still would not necessarily know what's going on inside the computer. An application program talks to the operating system and tells the operating system to do various things in terms of manipulating data. And the operating system does many of those things on behalf of the application software. So one of the things we do with the application software is we do a check of the software to make sure that it's the same software that we installed 6 years ago. But that doesn't, we don't check the operating system to see if it's exactly the same as it was 6 years ago. A person either in the election department or not in the election department could insert what we typically refer to as a virus that would change the way the votes are counted. And that virus would not have to be in the application software, it could be in the operating system. And there are ways of getting that virus into the computer without breaching the physical security of the box.
How would that be done without breaching the physical security of the box?
Well, my favorite is the one that was used in the Stuxnet virus in Iran that destroyed their computers that were processing nuclear material. According to news reports, somebody took a circuit board and installed it in the printer. And the printer talks to the computer, and that circuit board then inserted the virus into the computer, and they never had to touch the computer at all. So clearly something like that could be done. But there are other probably easier ways for an outsider to trigger a virus if the virus is already in the software. If it was built into the computer by the election vendor, then all you need to do is trigger it and tell it which races you want to change.
All right, let me stop you there for a second, and I want to back up to various types of people who might be interested in the outcome of the election. Let's talk about an outsider, somebody who wants a certain race to go a certain way, but they are not in the Pima County Elections Department, and they don't have any association with Diebold or any of the manufacturers of software. Could somebody like that, with the current systems that's in place, be able to flip an election?
If the software was designed to flip an election, it would be trivial for them to trigger the software. If the software was not designed to flip an election, then you would have to insert the virus into the computer somehow. You could do it through something like the printer. It is also possible, if the computer is designed to communicate through the power line, it would be possible for you to communicate with the computer through the power line. If the computer is designed to do wireless communications, it would be possible for you to communicate with the computer through a wireless connection. If the person didn't have any connection with the election department but could gain physical access to the room in which the computer resides, it would be possible for him to just rip off one of these tamper-evident seals, do whatever he wanted to the computer physically, and then put a new seal back on that has the same number. These seals are purchased from commercial companies, and you could duplicate the seals if you wanted to.
Okay. Now, the physical stuff that has been done in the past, mostly due to your prodding, has that made it more difficult for an outsider to make these kind of changes?
It has made it more difficult for an outsider to gain physical access to the computer, yes.
All right. Now, a number of times you said if the system was not designed with a virus or words to that effect. Let me back up. The GEMS software, is that open source that people can look through it to see if it has any Trojan horses built in?
It most definitely is not. It's considered by the company to be proprietary software. They will not even let the election department look at the source code.
Well, surely the Department of Arizona Secretary of State has looked at the source code.
No.
So that's what you mean by black box. Anything could be in there.
Anything could be in there, and we would not necessarily know it. The federal testing that certifies software for use in elections is actually done by contract companies who are hired by the election machine vendors and paid by the election machine vendors, and they report to the election machine vendors on their analysis of the system when they're certifying it for use in elections. So even the federal government doesn't have access to the software.
So explain to us how, if somebody had nefarious designs on being able to control elections in the future and was part of the team at Diebold or one of these other companies, how they could design a system that would allow people in the future, when you don't even know who's running, to flip an election.
They could design a little subroutine, a little piece of software, and put it into the computer somewhere, not necessarily in the application software file, as long as it's in the computer someplace. And as long as that software can be triggered and effectively programmed, then it can act on election day to do whatever you want it to do. In a computer, you can do pretty much anything you want, because it's not even bound by the laws of physics other than electrons moving around in the system. So if the software were there and it were designed to flip an election, to change votes in an election, then it would just need to be triggered and programmed. And this could be done simply with a ballot.
Explain to me how, so if you knew that this was in there and you had a ballot, how could you trigger the software?
If I knew it was in there and I knew how it was designed to be triggered, the triggering mechanism could be something like putting a certain pattern of votes on a ballot. some pattern of votes that would not be realistic for an ordinary voter. And then, if you wanted to change, let's say, the presidential race, you could use any or all of the other races for triggering the mechanism. And once you've triggered the mechanism, then it could just read whatever vote you put into the presidential race, and it would say, okay, this is the guy who is chosen to win this election.
Now, that's a way that you could do it with a ballot. My understanding is that the precincts also have a touchscreen.
Touchscreen voting machines. These touchscreen voting machines were mandated by the federal government in 2002, the Help America Vote Act, and they put into the act that any county that bought touchscreen voting machines would be considered to have met the requirement for handicapped voting, even though many handicapped people cannot use a touchscreen voting machine. Still, those were considered to be a compliance with federal law. So virtually everybody in the country now has these touchscreen voting machines, either exclusively or at least there for handicapped voters, but anybody can use one of them who wants to. So if I go into the touchscreen voting machine, again, if I'm voting a ballot and I put in some pattern that is unrealistic for an ordinary voter. For example, let's say I double vote the presidential race.
What do you mean double vote?
Yeah, I vote for both the Democrat and the Republican in the presidential race. And I do that, let's say, 5 or 6 times in a row.
Will it let you accept, will it accept that if you try?
The machine keeps kicking it back and requiring you to do it over again. So if you keep doing it, after some point, the machine could be programmed to recognize that you are, in fact, the criminal who is about to flip the race, and it could put up a new screen, a menu on the screen and say, okay, master, how do you want me to flip this election?
Now, clearly that could affect the votes that were cast on that machine, but so what? In the scale of things, that's going to be maybe 100 votes.
At the end of the day, that machine's votes are loaded into the central computer, or the next day, they're loaded into the central computer. When they're loaded into the central computer, this is 2 computers talking to each other. Again, it's a black box operation. We don't actually know what kind of communication is taking place between those 2 computers. So if it was designed to communicate some kind of fraud plan, then that TSX machine could communicate that fraud plan to the central tabulator.
Now, we've discussed a little bit about how somebody who is completely unfamiliar or unrelated to anybody might be able to access and change the election. How if there was originally a plan or by these the people who designed the system, well, and let me back up. What version of the system are we using that was produced by Diebold?
We're using a version that came out in 2006.
So if that was true, would it have had to have been true that it was built in 2006 or before, or could someone from Diebold have, or someone associated with these companies have inserted this kind of code that you're talking about after that date? I
think it's unlikely that they would have inserted it after that date, although I wouldn't rule that out.
Okay. Now, I'd like to talk about if you were somehow worked with inside the Pima County Elections Department and wanted to flip an election. And let's presume that there's nothing in any of the software or the hardware that is designed to allow people to flip the elections. How would and could somebody do that with insider access?
For an insider, it would be child's play, because before each election, the employees of the election department have to go in and program the computer for the upcoming election. They have to tell the computer who's running in what races and so forth. They have to design all the ballots and everything. And they do that without being observed by election observers. Not that it would necessarily mean anything if we were observing them, because we probably wouldn't know what they were doing most of the time. But they have access to the computer before every election. And so if they wanted to insert a virus software, it'd be easy to do.
Well, wouldn't that be detectable? My understanding is there's logic and accuracy tests and other things that go on to make sure that somebody doesn't interfere?
This virus could be designed to only operate on election day, and it could be designed to only operate when the number of votes in a precinct exceeds a certain number. The logic and accuracy test typically has, maybe 5 or 10 votes per precinct. We don't tax the system in the logic and accuracy test.
So, is there any physical security for when somebody, the Pima County Elections Department is telling the computer who's running and making these kind of changes? Are there any, you said there's no observers, are there cameras on them, anything like that?
There are cameras on them, and the cameras are supposedly being recorded on a digital file, and that digital file is supposed to be available on request.
Now, you use the word supposed to. Have you had experiences in the past where you've had concerns about the appearance of impropriety in elections?
When this video system was first set up, there were concerns because we discovered after the 2006 primary election that the county had printed summary reports in excess of the number of summary reports needed for the hand count audit. That might have been the general election that I'm thinking of. At any rate, they had printed something like a half a dozen extra summary reports that they weren't supposed to print, because we're not supposed to tell anybody ahead of election day who's winning the election. We asked the county, where are these reports and why did you print them? And they said all of the reports went into the boxes of the ballots and they're in the vault and they cannot be retrieved without a court order. So we filed a lawsuit and got a court order, and the court ordered them to bring all the boxes back from the vault and go through them and pull out all of these reports and make copies for us.
Were you given any copies?
We were given copies, and when we got all the copies, all of the reports that we had observed them printing were there. And none of the reports that we did not observe them printing were there. And we knew from the audit log in the computer exactly what day and time they had printed these extra reports. And so we asked them for a copy of the videotape. They told us that they were in the middle of an election and couldn't be bothered to provide us a copy of the digital tape until after the election was over. And then when the election was over, they told us that the videotape was set up on a cycle that it recorded over the same data every 20 days, and 20 days had passed, and therefore the video that we were interested in was no longer available.
Now, have you actually seen video that has been made available to you of what it looks like, what you're actually able to see when somebody's working on the central tabulator?
You don't see much. I mean, you just see people walking around in the room. You can't really see what's on the screen of the computer.
That's what I was going to ask you next, is even if you had the video, you might be able to make out who it was, but could you see the keystrokes, what they were doing?
No. No, in this case, we knew exactly what time of day these reports were printed, and so all we were interested in was knowing who was at the computer at that time of day, so that we could go after that person. But no, the videotape doesn't really tell you much about what's going on inside the computer, and you can't read the screen of the computer screen.
Would that have any effect on somebody's ability, like you said, to go in when they're...
Happen to early votes.
Now, are you personally interested in not only your vote being correctly counted, but do you have any personal interest in the votes in Pima County to be correctly counted?
The reason I've been serving on this Election Integrity Commission for the last 6 years is specifically because I am very concerned about the votes being counted correctly in Pima County.
Are you aware of the request for relief that we have made in this particular lawsuit?
Yes.
And are the requests for relief, specifically the injunctive relief of separating the vote by mail or the early votes by precinct and then hand auditing them, would they address your concerns with the system?
Yes.
Would you benefit personally from having that relief granted to you?
I would benefit personally in knowing that the election was honestly counted. Yes.
Thank you. No further questions. Mr. Jergels.
Mr. Duniho, you serve on the Elections Integrity Commission, correct?
Yes.
And were you at the meeting on Friday?
I called the meeting on Friday. Yes, I was there.
And is it your motion to have the recommend to the board that the early ballots be pre-sorted by precinct?
Yes.
And that motion was carried by the commission, correct?
Yes.
So that recommendation has gone forward to the board of supervisors for them to consider, correct?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about the potential flaws in the software and the machines and all that. Nevertheless, the software and machines have all been approved by the federal government, is that correct?
Yes.
And by the state government, is that correct?
Well, the state government approved them because the federal government approved them, yes.
But the state and Pima County actually have no choice but to use software and devices that are approved by the federal government.
Actually, the Secretary of State has authority to approve things that are not approved by the federal government.
On a preliminary basis.
On a preliminary basis.
And do you think that a different election procedure should be adopted as far as election integrity? Relief can be sought by going to the legislature and having a bill passed, isn't that correct?
I have advocated that, yes.
And
In fact, a couple of years ago, we put together an omnibus election integrity bill and gave it to Jonathan Payton, who told us that he would shepherd it through the legislature.
It's also possible to advocate directly with the Secretary of State, who's in charge of elections for the state of Arizona.
We have advocated directly with the Secretary of State. As a matter of fact, when Ken Bennett was appointed as Secretary of State, he came to one of our Election Integrity Commission meetings, and I specifically asked him personally that when he started changing the manual, that I wanted to sit on the committee that changed the manual so that I could influence the change in the manual. When he set up the committee, he told me that he was setting up the committee. He appointed John and Benny White to the committee instead. And they reported back to our commission on the changes they were recommending and on the changes that were made by the Secretary of State's office. Incidentally, they did not tell us about the sentence that was added to the Secretary of State's manual that required pre-sorting of early ballots for the hand count audit. They never mentioned that to us, and so we didn't know that that was the case until we got your response to Brad Roach's lawsuit yesterday. And in fact, at that meeting Friday, it was not mentioned.
Sir, you're not going to be able to testify if you don't play by the rules.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is not a bully pulpit.
Yes.
This is not your chance to get up and speak about your political views. This is a courtroom. Yes. Mr. Jerkowitz has an opportunity to cross-examine you.
Okay.
You took the stand for Mr. Roach, and you provided that testimony to me. Remember, you're testifying for me because I'm tasked with this question. You tacitly acknowledged you would give Mr. Jerkowitz the same courtesy as you give Mr. Roach in responding to those questions. I'm going to hold you to that tacit acknowledgement. So you answer Mr. Jerkowitz's questions, and you'll do so completely. Don't launch off and go into other areas because what it is, Mr. Connell, it doesn't help me in reaching my decision.
I'm sorry. I thought I was answering his question.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you. So, Mr. Duniho, the Secretary of State is empowered to issue rules governing elections, correct? And they issue what's called election procedures manual, which you referred to, correct?
Yes.
That is also reviewed by the Arizona Attorney General and the Governor, correct?
Yes.
And in past years, there had been no legal requirement to pre-sort early ballots, isn't that correct?
That's right.
And for this new manual that was adopted for October 2011, the Secretary of State did adopt a rule concerning pre-sorting early ballots.
Yes.
And presumably based on some of the input that you're given to it, is that correct? Or if you know.
I was not a member of the committee, so I don't know what influenced him to make that change.
Did you request such relief from Secretary Bennett?
I did not personally request that relief from Secretary Bennett.
Okay. Did somebody that the committee, the Elections Integrity Commission, or somebody you know that you're aware of request that relief from Secretary Bennett?
I do not know. I presume somebody somewhere asked for it because I don't think he would have put it in without somebody asking for it, but I don't know who it was that advocated that.
Thank you, sir. Now, the Secretary of State is also involved, as you discussed, doing an LMA, which is the logic and accuracy check. It's both the software and the mechanical hardware to make sure that it's accurately tabulating the votes correctly, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And they go to each county and check out the devices, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And a copy of the election software is sent to the Secretary of State as well, isn't that correct?
Of the database.
Correct. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
So I'm a little still unclear about what your allegation here is as far as what erroneous tabulations may have occurred. Are you suggesting that Mr. Romney or someone on Mr. Romney's behalf did something that he prevailed in the presidential preference election in February when he shouldn't have?
I'm only suggesting that it could have happened. I'm not suggesting that it did happen. I do not know. And I do not know because we didn't do a proper hand count audit.
And you're suggesting that Mr. Romney would not have prevailed in Pima County otherwise?
I'm not suggesting any such thing. I'm only suggesting that because we have a black box counting our votes, we don't know whether the report that comes out at the end is correct or not. And the reason we don't know is because we don't do the hand count audit by precinct. If we did the hand count audit by precinct, I might be able to sit here and tell you that there was no fraud in the computer. But I simply don't know because we didn't do the hand count audit properly.
I have no further questions.
I do, Your Honor. You were asked about the change in Secretary of State manual by Mr. Jerkowitz. You remember that?
Yes.
All right. And have you read the letters that were attached to the response filed by the county to our petition?
Yes.
And specifically, I'm referring to letters that went back and forth from the Secretary of State to Brad Nelson, the Director of Pima County Elections.
Yes.
All right. Now, let me back up. You said you did not know who advocated for the change in the Secretary of State's manual that requires sorting by precinct of early mail-in ballots.
Objection, Your Honor. That's stated, that's not in evidence. That's not what the manual says.
Hold on a second. Can I repeat that question?
You said you did not know that the change in the Secretary of State's manual requires sorting by precinct of early mail-in ballots.
Mr. Jerkowitz, did you hear that?
I did, Your Honor. The manual states that the county.
Okay, let's just stick with what the question is. Can I read it to Mr. Jerkowitz one more time?
Now let me back up. You said you did not know who advocated for the change in the Secretary of State's manual that requires sorting by precinct of early mail-in ballots.
To me, Mr. Jerkowitz, that just sounds like you're asking a question. You may be ready for your objection.
But that's not what the manual says.
I understand. But you can, your objection's overruled. You can ask, I'm sorry, you can ask the questions.
I'm sorry, what was the
the question was, you're not aware of who it was that advocated for a change regarding sorting of the early ballots.
I am not.
Now, is it because of the response filed by the respondents, in this case the defendants, did you become aware that change had occurred?
Yes, that's how I became aware that it had occurred.
Now, if presumably this was in the Secretary of State's manual, why didn't you know about it?
The Secretary of State's manual was a very large book, and we had two members of our Election Integrity Commission who served on the committee that changed the manual, and they provided, I thought, thorough reports back to our commission on changes that had been made.
And is one of the members John Moffitt?
Yes.
And is John Moffitt sitting in the court today?
Yes.
Can you tell us where he is?
He's sitting next to Mr. Jerkowitz.
All right. Now, you said you got reports back about the changes that were being discussed with the Secretary of State?
Yes.
Did anybody ever tell you or tell the commission during any of the meetings that this was going to occur?
No.
All right. From the letters that were attached to the response by the defendant, it looks like not only did this occur, but Pima County asked to not have to do what the Secretary of State requires them to do.
That's right.
Were you aware of that?
No.
That Pima County was asking, hey, Secretary of State, we know you're requiring us to do this kind of sorting, but we don't want to.
No one told us on the commission that that was taking place.
If you had been told, would you have made recommendations to the Board of Supervisors about whether or not you should make that request?
Absolutely.
And what would your recommendation to the Board of Directors, Board of Supervisors be?
My recommendation would have been to comply with the new requirement in the Secretary of State's Election Procedures Manual and not to request a waiver.
All right. Now, you were asked if the Pima County Elections Integrity Commission had made recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and you have.
Yes.
Do you know when the next time that the Board of Supervisors can act on that recommendation would be?
Their next meeting is on November 13th.
Would that be in time to enact the request that you've made for this particular election cycle, general election 2012?
If they were to make a decision on that day, we would still have time, 1 week, to sort the ballots and do a precinct-level hand count audit.
And the request apparently that has been made says the county shall pre-sort the early ballot returns by precinct or by legislative districts prior to tabulation. Did you read that line in the letters that were included in the response?
Yes.
All right. Now, would sorting the ballots by legislative districts, would that assist you or alleviate the plaintiff's concerns about these votes or this election getting flipped?
It would only work if we did the hand count audit by legislative district, which is generally a larger number of ballots than are contained in a precinct.
Are the results announced of all the elections by legislative district?
They are.
Okay. Including the non-legislators, are they announced that way too? In other words,
Only legislators' races would be announced by legislative district.
Okay, so if I wanted to make sure somebody was not flipping, say, a particular Board of Supervisors election, would you be able to do that if everything was separated by legislative district?
No, that wouldn't do you any good at all.
So the relief that we're asking for here is would not necessarily even be addressed by the Secretary of State's manual.
If they sorted by precinct, it would be addressed.
And if they sorted by legislative district,
It would not.
thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. You may step down.